pronouns he, him. And this is the first sort of test episode of Roll for Origin, which is a Supers TTRPG history podcast. Supers not necessarily superheroes, since we're going to be doing some things that are kind of on the border there. I'm an old time Supers GM. I lived through, unfortunately, all these eras that we're going to be talking about. I'm the community coordinator and manager for Open Hearth Gaming. And I'm also the designer for Hearts of Woolen. And with me is Jay.
Hey, I'm Jay. I'm a game designer working on Lifted by Cortex, and I also write the Play Fearless newsletter on Substack. And I'm also an old time comics, supers, sci fi fanatic. And so I'm happy to be here with Lowell doing this. I saw the list of games that Lowell wanted to cover, and you folks are in for a treat. This is fantastic. There's some games on here that I have not seen, and I've been around a long time. So thanks for doing this, Lowell.
This came out of my having done a variety of blog posts on Super's RPG history. And we're starting with the first Super's RPG, which is Superhero 20,044. This is from 1977, and it's set in a near future. At our point, it is literally 2044, after vast political, scientific, and military changes. It's written by a guy named Donald Saxman, and it's subtitled The Campaign of Superpowered Crime Fighters in the Year 2044. So this is just 36 pages, 11 by 8.5. It's got a beautiful color cover, front and
Yeah.
back. It's got some adverts. Game Science put it out. This is one of the earliest games I ever bought and played. And I don't remember playing it according to the rules that are actually in here, but I was, 8 or 9 at the time. It's a challenge to describe this game because it's not an RPG as we think about it. It very much comes out of the really early days of RPGs. We've got those wargamey campaigns that evolved into role-playing games. D&D rolls into that, but there were still a lot of people running these sort of directed campaigns all over the country, especially in England and in the US. And that book, Playing at the World by John Peterson, talks a lot about this. So this game says it can play up to 20 people, which I believe it can because it's parallel play. There's very little in this game talking about how, okay, let's get everybody together at their table. Instead, each character has a character sheet, and you've got a weekly breakdown planning sheet. You write in the time spent during the week in each block, and you submit that to the referee. And the referee tells you what happens. Those adjust some numbers for your character. Sometimes it's training. The GM tells you what crimes you encountered based on some random tables and what happens on their patrols. The book says you should do this in real time. So each week, the GM should get all these pages, and then the next week they should return them. So it's wild. The only thing that kind of looks a little bit more like our play is these handicapping scenarios in which the GM is supposed to set up the player on a small crime stopping event, and then they evaluate the player's performance within that scenario and score them on 8 areas like preventing criminals from operating, locating them, stopping the crime, tendency to cause damage, be injured or captured, like all of these things. So it's really wild. Again, very little about the groups and people working together. And in fact, while there's some discussion of teams, the vibe that you get from the setting that they describe is these are independent vigilantes operating in very different ways, trying to make a score for themselves. It feels very, very, very strange. In fact, and we'll come back to this later on, strikingly, there's an entire quite lengthy section of the book on how to play this solitaire. Like lots of tables, a good probably quarter of the book is dedicated to that, and it's wild. And so just for you to know, this is how we're going to start out each episode is kind of going through what the game is. And then we're going to talk about what the context is of that game and sort of gaming history for the genre and or for RPGs. Then we're going to talk about the comics context, and then we're going to discuss our general thoughts. So, Jay, you want to give us the rundown of where this falls in the history of gaming?
Sure. In 1977, I was 6. Out at that time, a first edition of D&D, Empire of the Petal Throne, Metamorphosis Alpha, Tunnels and Trolls, which is a favorite of mine, those are out. That year we would also see Traveler, Chivalry and Sorcery, and the basic D&D box set, all which showed how tabletop role-playing games have evolved into something closer to how we imagine them. Prior to this, a very wargaming approach, referees, parallel play, like you mentioned, plotted actions, campaigns, happened over large spans of time. That kind of reminds me of like play-by-email type
Yeah.
games, where you actually mail, not email, but play-by-mail games, where you actually mail turns in. Saxman would describe this in his introduction. A gamer at IU Bloomington played in a kitchen sink D&D campaign, which had John Carter's Mars, Doc Savage, and a host of other pop culture elements rolled into it. In particular, he dug the supers material and wanted to create a distinct system for that. And that's how we get this. Published by Game Science, which was trying to break into the games on top of their dice production. I didn't realize that they were around that early.
Yeah.
Yeah. They had a really early days approach to layout, organization, and presentation.
Oof, yes.
I know, so I looked through that, the PDF of that, and on top of what I'm used to seeing from like big box war games, that layout, yeah, that really brought back a bunch of old memories like squad leader type
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
And keep in mind, this is even cleaner because this is somebody's OCR scan that was uploaded to an archive. And it's much cleaner because the original typeface is not good. So
wow.
imagine the resolution like de-enhanced like a couple of steps.
The artwork is incredible, though, particularly the covers, some of the interior work by Mike Cagle, really solid and sells the rest. I remember also at being a kid looking through all the different superhero artist stuff outside of the comics, a lot of the stuff in the RPG scene, like Jeff D,
Oh, yeah.
folks like that. Yeah, so planned supplements, expanding the character material, that stuff never materialized. Judges Guild had a supplement, Hazard, which was basically a big hex map on one side and a bunch of scattered material on the other side. In 1979, when Villains and Vigilantes launched, that was pretty much the end of Superhero 2044. There was a Kickstarter for a revised edition. It funded, but the creator never actually fulfilled the campaign. 4 years overdue. Unfortunately, Saxman has passed away since then.
Game Science did a reproduction in 2010. Not sure how well that went over, but this second Kickstarter, you know, it's one of those things that go, why? And
Right.
then like why would you of all the things to do? And then of course it funds and the person vanishes with the money. So,
That's the worst, too.
yeah.
I didn't know about this game prior to, and I can save this for later, but you brought it up, and then I was fascinated with it
Yeah.
because it is not what I thought I was going to see, but you could see a lot of archaeology, RPG archaeology in there. So,
hmm
yeah.
So this is an interesting book as well because this comes out before really modern comics get set in the kind of ways that even we think of it. So this is a transitional period, the mid 1970s. We've got a lot of change in the old guard in terms of editorial oversight and them throwing things at the wall to see that would what would stick. New
Right.
characters, trying to appeal to feminism, trying to appeal to other things. The comic code is sort of loosened a bit at this point. A lot of this would end up having in the following year in 1978 with the great DC Comics implosion, where they put out just a ton of books and then that all collapsed.
Right.
One of the things we did see in this period that we actually see reflected on the cover back and front is there were lots of redesigns for characters with new approaches to costumes. On the back cover of the book, there's a thinly disguised version of Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, and even Martin X from the Guardians of the Galaxy. Plus, we've got Hawkman. The figure I think that's really important to this book and some other games is Dave Cockrum.
Right.
He's the one who was involved in a lot of costume design changes. his run on Legion of Superheroes with Cary Bates in 1973, and in particular, Saxman mentions Legion of Superheroes as a thing in his introduction. Of course, then Cockrum went over to the X-Men with Claremont from 75 to 77, which gave us the X-Men and the X-Men costumes as we now know it. So we get a real shift going on there. The Legion of Superheroes also plays in, of course, we've got this 2044 setting, and there's definitely the vibe of that future take on things. We've got the Science Police,
Right.
which is literally from the Legion of Superheroes that are a thing in this setting, and we've got aliens in the setting. It is wild. So Cockrum's run on Legion is important, and then after that, Mike Grell did a long run on Legion. This is before he went into the indie circuit, and his stuff is there's a real kind of weird, almost fetish wear look to a lot of that stuff that comes in this period. When I was a kid, I was like, "Ooh, look at this
Right,
stuff!"
right. Look at this.
Yeah, but it set the template for younger, hipper superheroes, what would become Byrne and Claremont's run on X-Men, and then eventually Perez and Wolfman
Right.
on New Teen Titans. This is also a game that is before we have events as we know them. We're going to see in later superhero games where very much those event books shaped things for how people did stuff, sometimes literally in the course of the Marvel Adventure game and some just vibe for other ones. The only big event that I could find is the Spider-Man Superman crossover in 1976, which I think then after that we had Batman Hulk, I want to say a little bit later.
Oh, wow.
But again, this is all before the birth of indie comics. And one of the things being that there is a weird crossover because a lot of early game stores were comic book stores
Right,
or
right.
used bookstores or things like that. So there is a lot of synergy that's going on. That's the context of this game. Uh, I'm going to start with you, Jay. Thoughts? We're going to kind of toss back and forth on it.
No, that's fair. That's fair. So I went through when I first saw this on the list. I remember seeing that cover before, and I went to the garage looking to see if I had it, and I didn't. Then I tried to see if I could get a copy of it. Reading through it, I read through it twice, and my first reading through most RPG games is getting to know what's in here, what's cool, what will I come back to, and that kind of stuff. My second reading is, what do I need to know to get this on the table? And there's a
Yeah.
lot, right? I don't know, right? There's a lot of charts. And then the whole parallel play where not everyone is interacting in one shot, right? Part of me thinks that's fantastic. How does that work? What does that look like? Could I even get that going on the table? And I'm not so sure
Yeah.
today that we could get people together, even 4 or 5 people, to do it, right? Just for fun, right? Not as an experiment, not as a let's see how it goes. I don't know that we could pull this off today. And then again, like I said, a lot of the tables and things like that in there. But again, those tables you were referencing kind of offline. You're not doing them in
Yeah.
the middle of the game as the GM, right?
The thing is, there's a thought in, oh, okay, you could do this play by mail, but play by mail and play by post stuff is much more interactive and the players working together. And it isn't
Right.
the GM writing responses. One of the things is there's a whole, besides the sort of wargamey thing that's going on in RPGs, there's this whole thing coming out of, I think, Flying Buffalo and some other places where you've got
Right.
those things where people are doing turns for sort of role-playing style games like Berserker and things like that, where they're sending them in, they're getting processed by a computer, and then they're getting turns back. That was a
Back.
big
Right.
thing advertised in all the backs of the gaming magazines for, gosh, I think up through the mid 80s. That was a
Yeah.
thing.
No, for sure. I've played some of those.
Star
Yeah.
Web, that was one.
Yep. Star Web. Yeah. There's Conan, right?
Yeah.
Hyperborea. There's a handful of those. Legends was out there. Played a lot of Legends. Yeah.
See, I never got the guts to actually send away for those kinds of things. I had a couple of friends that did, but I never did that. So one of the things is for me, is this was just an absolute nostalgia blast. Going and
Right.
every time I turned the page, I would see an illustration that I was like, oh, I know that one. Absolutely remember that because I poured over this book so much. But as I said, I was 8 or 9, and
Right.
it was not a game that my sister, who's 5 years older than me, she was the person who taught me how to play, and she had a whole group, and it was a game store and things like that. But this is not a game that the others were playing. They were still into Tacumul and D&D and stuff, but I really wanted to do
Right.
superheroes. And I remember kind of playing it, but again, I reread the rules and I'm like, I don't remember these rules at all. I don't think I
Right.
knew the rules. I don't think I used these at all because they
Right.
are weirdly open at the same time as they're weirdly crunchy. I don't know what to make of them.
And this is a time where I feel like most of the rules were pretty. If there were gaps, they were gaps in areas that we're not playing in, right? Here, there's stuff that's just left wide open. I want to know how these powers work. What are my limitations? How far can I push these things? And you're not getting all of that.
No,
I see the
you are
point.
underselling that. There are no examples beyond two characters at the back and a couple of minor descriptions of superpowers. Like there's no framework given for them whatsoever. Characters have an
Right.
archetype, so you can be a unique, which is natural powers. You can be a tool master who's a gadgeteer, or you could be an Ubermensch, not a great term, which is a non-powered adventurer. Uh, you're given a bunch of points, so a point spend system. That's interesting. To divide them
Right.
across what they call prime requisites. Now, here's the thing. I'm about to dive in. This bugs me. I don't know why they call them prime requisites, because the point of prime requisites in old D&D was those are the stats that you needed for your particular character class,
Right.
right?
Right.
But they use prime requisites to refer to all stats or characteristics. Okay.
All the stats. Right.
So anyway, you get that pool of points, and then you can put some of your points into a power, and I'm doing air quotes, which has a nebulous effects description. You get to say what it does. There's some talking here about what you can do with it, but more about, hey, don't let it get out of hand. Like, don't go overboard. And
Right.
hey,
And
maybe
that's
you want
it.
to take
Yeah.
some limitations too to get some points. It's all very vague. And I, I didn't remember that there were no guidelines for powers, but there just aren't. Is it anything? It's weird.
Yeah. And like I said, I think today we've got other games to kind of figure out what kind of constraints, what to do with this. But in 1977, we didn't have, or at least I didn't have, and the folks I played with, we didn't have that. We didn't have enough game history to know what to do with it, right?
But we had games that had powers, like Metamorphosis Alpha has the
Right.
mutation system, and of course you got
Right.
spells and class
Yep.
abilities from other things to like completely leave that aside is weird. And the lead that we're bearing is this is told to us in an interview with Saxman on the Grognardia website that he avoided putting powers in because he was afraid that he would get hit for infringement by the comic book companies. He kind of alludes to that in the text, which, the companies were litigious. There was a big battle over the use of the term superhero and supervillain, and DC and Marvel were battling each other and publishing books just to hold on to certain copyrights and stuff.
Right.
So
Right.
I can understand that, and yet nothing, nothing.
Right. Nothing. Nothing. No, you're right. When I think about spells, right? Spells are a kind of power, and in most games back then, they had limitations written into the description of the spells, and you could have very easily adapted that approach to powers. So yeah, I'm with you.
And as we'll see when we get to the first editions of Villains Vigilantes, that literally for the magic spells power, they say, go to another book, another existing fantasy RPG, and just use that, which
Use that,
feels
right?
a little bit like a cop out, but
That is funny. Yeah, when we get there, V&V is the first superheroes game I played, then Champions. But yeah, so I've got a soft spot for villains and
yeah,
vigilantes.
see, for me, of course, as a kid, I fixated on Superhero 2044, and that was my thing because there weren't a lot of other people playing it, but I could convince my peer group to play it. And so then when V&V came out, I was like, oh, no, I'm going to stick with the original, Superhero 2044, until of course it became clear that that was the game. This is a trap I have fallen into many, many times in my gaming life of, oh no,
That
no,
is
you've got to
funny.
stick with the game you like.
Now, I think for me, had I had this in 77, late 70s, early 80s, I'd have latched onto the solo rule set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have latched onto that. And so I'd have kept this around just to be able to play it on my own. That's the only reason why I had a lot of the ASL
Hmm.
stuff is you could play some of those scenarios by yourself.
Yeah, what I think is, and it is worth pointing at this, like that solo toolkit at the back is really good. A lot of it is dedicated to generating your foes and
Hmm.
in exhaustive detail for your fights against them and figuring out what they do. But what's really cool is the section on, and there's some parallel on this earlier, on generating a crime. What does a crime look like? Like, what kind of crime is it?
Right.
Where is it happening? And this is the place where I first saw organ legging listed as a crime, which when I got older we realized was taken from Larry Niven and those books. But there's some clever stuff in there, and
Right. I
tools that
agree.
are reasonably worth looking at. The setting is odd too. In reading a couple of these books that are superheroes but also predict the future, and in particular, I'm thinking of Underground and
Okay. Yeah.
Aberrant. It
Right.
is really interesting to see what they're positing for the future at this
Right.
point. And this one, of course, is so far out because it's at this point 77 years out from
Right.
there. And of course, the world has been destroyed and there's been nuclear war. We're not in America.
And that's
Yeah,
fair. Yeah, that's
fair.
fair.
We're
Right.
not in America. We're in Inguria, which is an independent Pacific island colonized by the United States
Right.
at some point in the future. But now it's independent, given a whole bunch of global wars and future shit that has gone on. And it is, this is the other thing we talked about organization. The book, the book goes, hey, here's some rules, and then here's some
Yeah.
stuff about the world, and here's some rules, and here's some stuff about the world. And it doesn't mark those out with headings or anything
It
like
doesn't.
that.
Right. It didn't.
Um, we we get a vibe here that I think reflects how people played games at the time, which is not a group of honored heroes getting together to take on crime, to fight things. Instead, it's a bunch of dummies with powers that want to get famous or rich. And the,
Or
the, the
rich.
way
Right.
they're doing it is by gigging in this weird future country.
No, and I got that vigilante vibe too. The two things that stuck with me is how did he get there, right? This independent Pacific island. What I know he's projecting forward, but how does that how does his brain work to get there to make that the current state? And then I'm just getting into gaming at that point in time, right? And so I don't know what else is going on. That is this how everyone else played other games, right? In this kind of lone wolfish kind of play at the table, and that's why this is this way, right? Well, we've got these solo vigilantes out there, and not a team thing.
I don't think that in any of those early games that I can remember, there's any mechanics or system or even maybe even setting push that drives the players to play together. Like modules do.
Right,
In particular, here I'm thinking of Gamma World. Gamma World is
right,
about making up a bunch of characters that could absolutely have reason to hate one another, and they have to go and do stuff. It isn't until we get some modules for that like, okay, you all come from the same village, or you all have this starting point. We don't get that
right.
until there. There definitely is a lot of independent vibe. We have that the same thing in Boot Hill, of course, and Top Secret, which you would think, okay, everybody needs to be on the same page for a mission,
Right.
but that is not the way those books are set up. There's no punishment for going off plan. There's no incentive necessarily for the players to work together. There isn't any bonus experience. And in fact, if you want the loot, if there is loot,
Right.
you know,
You just take it.
yeah,
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that and yeah. Then I could see how this comes together this way. But it is strange. I remember the first comic books that I'm reading at this time are team books. It is the X-Men, right? Legion of Superheroes, and it's all team oriented.
yeah.
So this would have been a weird thing for me to pick up and see and read and try to get it to the table in 1977. Yeah, 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 yeah. But again, like I said, I ran through the book twice, and the mechanics are fascinating in an archaeology kind of way. I would have loved to even now try to get it to the table to see what do we get.
Here's the thing too that you mentioned there. They want it to be set in a United States analog, but they don't want it to be in the US. So
Right.
like we kind of got that going on there.
And I'm like, at that point, with all the wars and everything, why not just move it to another planet,
Yeah.
right?
And
Move it to a different planet.
they've got different aliens and things like
Right.
that in there that are kind of neat, but they aren't particularly well defined. It's I just don't know. The other thing we should mention is while there aren't superhero rules, there are rules for resolving combat. And the resolution system is very weird. And it is a bunch of modifier tables. There are all of these
Yeah.
modifier tables that you've got to
Yeah.
cross check. And there's a different procedure for resolving direct physical and mental attacks versus transformation attacks versus projectile attacks. I have read this a couple of times, and I could not even begin to run this, to write out a cheat sheet, to explain it. It's wild, but
No,
somebody
it
must
is
have been playing it, and
right. It is wild. It is wild. Again, even with squad leader type stuff, there's a bunch of different tables, bunch of different modifiers. A lot of them are situational. You can miss some while you're messing around, but there's kind of a flow
mhm.
to them there, right? It's tedious sometimes, but there's a flow there. As I'm looking through these, again, I didn't get it on the table and play with anyone, but as I'm looking through the resolution rules, the different tables and charts and stuff, I'm with you. I'm like, what is even going on? How long would it take to resolve a thing? But again, this is supposed to be the GM kind of offline away from everyone
Mhm.
else running through the turn. And so maybe it works that way. I don't
Yeah,
know, right?
I suppose it does. For me, this is the era right around this time that a lot of the micro games like Ogre,
Yeah,
GEV,
yeah,
Malay and Wizard, the original Starfleet battles,
right.
and those are the kinds of things that I know were the kinds of tactical stuff that I was used to. We're very lucky that we had a game store that opened here in 78, I want to say,
Hmm.
and was a bookstore and literally, war games, hobby games, and role-playing games and miniatures. They had, the very earliest miniatures in the cases and stuff. They looked terrible. Uh, but we had a very strong historical wargaming
Hmm.
community around here, a lot of Napoleonics people
Right.
and stuff. And even they, like those systems are, as you say, ASL and those, they're definitely cleaner than this is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like because we're doing it on such a small scale, we're just one character, we've got to make the system complex to take up the rest of that space.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. Yeah, but I'm with you. I don't. It's weird, the resolution system. And I don't know. It doesn't have to be that way. It didn't
Right.
have to be that way, right? The superpowers aren't that complicated, right? So why, right? The rest of the system doesn't support that. It seems a little, yeah. I don't know. I don't get it.
It is interesting. Like, again, This is the first Supers game, and it's as much a sci-fi game as it is a Supers game. It doesn't
Right.
like land into that genre, which I think is really striking. One thing that is notable, though, the superhero games that we'll see over the next, few years, Villains and Vigilantes, Super World,
Hmm.
Champions, this is the only game that begins with a setting that gives us a backdrop for it and a real premise. All the others have, some framework or something, but it's very, very much trappings. Champions doesn't have any of it. V&V has a
Right.
light touch with that. And it's the only superhero city book or like really focused city description up until we get the New York supplement for the first Marvel game. Like literally,
Right.
I went through and I tried to find if there were any other books that gave us a city
Right.
as a backdrop, but no, that's we get our monster manuals, which are
Right.
our
Monster
enemies
manuals.
books
Yes.
and modules.
That's interesting, and I remember that New York book. So yeah, that's funny. That's a big run before you get a city book
Yeah.
or
This
setting.
is
Yeah.
pure nostalgia fuel for me. I have to say, going back to it, it's the idea of doing a weekly planning thing. Like I think there's something to it in terms of that kind of being like downtime in
Right.
some ways. Like you could resolve it that way. I love the idea that you have random patrols and the crimes that you fight. That'd be a fun thing to generate for characters between sessions.
Right.
What crimes did you stop? What did you do?
Right. But then at some point, yeah, we're getting everybody kind of back together, interacting together.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I have a Mutants and Masterminds game where we're doing kind of a year one game. They're all running year one versions of existing heroes. And while they are all working together, they've all chosen drastically different characters that they all have very different lives. You know, Doctor Strange, Raven, Sue Storm, Silver Surfer, and
Oh wow,
a
yeah.
inversion of Wolverine that are all in very different directions. I almost kind of want to do a tell me what you did during the week kind of thing now,
Right,
given
right,
given the inspiration of this.
right. Oh no, that would be fantastic. I would love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that would be fantastic. Because I feel like then you're the guy pulling them all together, right? They could be doing some lifting, but you've got to provide that initial drive. But we can fill in gaps with what's your life like outside of this gathering, this team. Yeah, that'd be nice.
absolutely. A few other things to mention: movement rate tables, giant crime data and crime frequency tables,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
big hex map with the different patrol areas, and a general equipment table. Okay, I have to point this out because this kills me. The general equipment table with all these different things on it with different prices, and they worry about weight. Okay, and so the equipment has sort of behind it, it'll say like binoculars, P, telephone tracer, PB, scrambler for the above, C, like all these things. And then you're like, what does that mean? And it says, and I quote, a man with an average stamina can carry one PB plus two BE plus 8P and an unlimited number of C. A shoulder weapon is equal to two BE items, and a hand weapon is equal to three P items. But there's no explanation of what those terms are actually referring to.
Right. What does that mean? Right.
Just just wild to me.
That is wild. Because I'm always don't even mess around. If you care about weight, decide is it metric or are
Yes,
we doing our standard imperial system, right? And go with that. It's 5 ounces. It's 3 pounds, right? Whatever, right?
but it's also
Don't.
here. It's a superscape. Like if we're playing Twilight 2000, yeah, I want to
Right,
know how much you're
right,
carrying. I want to know how many clips you have. But
right.
but here it
Why?
says
Yeah,
something about your perception of what these guys are about and what
right,
they're doing, that they have to worry about how much money they have and how much
right.
they can carry. And if this is one PB too much, you know.
PB too much.
Don't know. Anything else you want to say about Superhero 2044?
No, this was fantastic, and I think it's a great place to start from, right? We get to see what some early superhero sci-fi kind of game is. If I had not read through this or been exposed to this, this is not what I would have picked,
Right.
right, at all. It doesn't even play like our traditional role-playing games, and that's fascinating to me. So this was a good first game to open up with.
And listeners, while we may start with some of the early games, we're not necessarily going to go in chronological order for any of these things. We're going to bounce around as the interest grabs us to talk about games that we've gone back and reread and gone, huh? Or, ooh. Listeners, that's our show. This is a podcast that's a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. We'll have links in the show notes to the various feeds and things like that. We'll have links to Jay's stuff like the Substack and other things in the show notes as well. Anything else you want to plug or talk about here before we wrap?
Oh no, this is good. I'm looking forward to doing more. I've seen the list. There's some fascinating games on that list, so I'm excited.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk at you later.